Hello, hello. This is going to be our 5th of 6 starter deck family overviews for the Altered TCG. Should be going up on the Saturday, the 27th, which means we will be 3 days away from the Kickstarter. Very exciting time. We've got some sort of a launch party going on in France with a bunch of different people that they're flying into there. We've got Ting Yun doing some really cool countdown art on her Instagram. We've got some teasing of some kind of final playmat giveaway, perhaps, or something like that going on, possibly going up this weekend. So very cool, very exciting last few days going into the launch. And yeah, if you don't know anything about what Altered is, as always, there's going to be some links in the description with some quick rules and other information. I don't want to get too much into any sort of learn to play or anything here. We're just going to hop right into looking at these cards. So first up, of course, is the Ordis Trooper, the very, very maximum basic 1 cost, 1 reserve cost, 1/1/1 character. That is all she's doing. And that is fine in this game, actually. Just being able to play a character for 1 that has some effect on the board is quite fine in this game. You can it basically means you get to spend 1 mana to say it's your opponent's turn. Buys you some time, see what they do, get to react a little bit better. That's kind of what the whole Izmir deck is about. So this card actually just fine. The rare upgrade gives you 2 stats, makes it a 1/2/2 on both plays. As we've gone through these, we've seen this is kind of a normal base rate for a rare. A lot of times they'll either give you 2 stats on both players or 3 stats on 1 play. It is sort of the baseline just stats upgrade for a rare. So this also just fine for a rare upgrade. Getting those extra 2 stats on a 1-drop is probably a little bit more efficient than getting it on a more expensive card. But it's a little hard to parse. At the end of the day, it's still a 1/2/2 character, which early on means it gets to square off with a 1/1/1 on the other side on day 1 or something and win outright, which is cool. Later on, will the 1 in forest be a problem? It depends on what biome you're in. Can you really afford to be being choosy with what biomes you're playing your 1-drop in? Who knows? So a bit of a tricky one to evaluate. I think it's pretty good offhand, but I could see it being left by the wayside in favor of other rares for sure. The faction shift is Izmir. We just talked about this. This is everything Izmir wants to be doing. They're going to have some of their own options for this kind of thing, I believe, but I don't think they necessarily are going to have a straight just 1/1/1/1/1/1 across the board, which maybe an Izmir deck decides they'd rather have that than some 2 cost, 1 cost kind of thing. Next up are the Ordis Cadetes. So this is an interesting one. There's a bunch of cards like this in this Ordis starter. So it's a 2/2/1/1/0, but it makes a token. So theoretically, it's a 2/2/2/2/1, which is understated, right? That is below par. For a 2 cost, you'd want to get a plain 2/2/2 if you had no text. And the fact that it makes a token, the token goes in its own expedition. It's basically a 2/2/1. However, if at some point you manage to boost all of your characters or all of your tokens, then you're getting some value out of it. And of course, if they have some sort of point removal, but if they're using their point removal on 2 costs, you're pretty happy anyway. But there's a few cards like this where the upside is, well, what if you boost everything? And we're going to see there's 2 different cards in this starter that can do that. So that's kind of what this is leaning into. The rare upgrade gives you that base rate of 2 costs for 2/2/2 in stats and puts the other token in the opposite expedition, which can be good or bad, right, depending on when and where you're playing it. But generally speaking, I'd rather have 1/1/1 on both sides than just on one, especially if it's day 1 and I don't have a 1 cost to play. That's pretty fine. The rare shift is the common, but instead of splitting expeditions, as it is again in Izmir, it has a support effect where you can toss it from reserve to make a spell cost 1 less. There's some of those running around in Izmir. Again, they're going to have options in faction to be doing stuff like this, but not necessarily with this token dynamic. And 2/2/1 is probably kind of efficient for their characters. But still, they're probably not boosting all their tokens, for instance. This is just maybe a little bit better than what they get to do otherwise. Next up, we have a monolith RuneScribe. This is a straight 2/2/2. No text, not much to say about it. It's perfectly fine. The rare upgrade's kind of funny. You give up a stat, you become stat inefficient, but in exchange, when you play it from hand, you get a resupply only if you have a token, which if you're Sigismar, you always will. We kind of skipped over talking about Sigismar himself. He just says at noon, every noon, you're going to get a 1/1 token. Just right into your hero expedition every single day. That gets... It is, if nothing else, very annoying for your opponent. Because now, at any day where they don't put something on both sides, you're probably winning one. Because you have your soldier on one side. If you're only going to play one thing, you'll just put it on the other side and say, well, you got to play 2 cards. If you don't play 2 cards, I'm winning one of these. And it makes it a bit uphill and tricky to deal with. And, of course, it's free value every day regardless. So, in this case, that rare monolith runescribe is a guaranteed resupply from hand. I am not the hugest fan of resupply, especially if your deck isn't sort of built around it in some way, shape, or form. So I don't know how I feel about giving up 1 stat on both plays to get a resupply on 1 play. I think in terms of the way they balance resupply, this is pretty on rate, but not my favorite if I'm being honest. Now the Axiom shift also says if you control a token, because they're making brass bugs instead of soldiers, you get a resupply. And Axiom is at least much more likely to have a sort of resupply-themed deck with a bunch of cards and effects that benefit from being resupplied into your reserve. So it's a little interesting for Axiom. You have to compare against their full card pool, what their other options are, etc., etc. Right, next up we have Frogprins, and this is an interesting rare upgrade. The base common is a 2/2/3/0/3. This is pretty standard. We've seen a few cards shaped like this across the factions. But, kind of flavorful. Your frog is good at forest and water and quite bad at mountain. And I believe the forest water biome card has some lily pads on it, so it's even better in that regard. The rare upgrade turns it into a 1/1/2/0/2. I have no earthly clue what I think about that. So it is technically, it's a little above rate for 1 cost. You're getting 4 stats. You are... if you pull this by surprise, say you're playing 2 common Frogprins and 1 rare, or just 1 rare Frogprins, and that's it. It's just filling in this random 1x slot in your deck, and all of a sudden, out of 1 cost, you're putting 2 in, a solo biome or something like that. You can really get some surprise value out of that. So it's a bit of a sneaky one. I don't know if this is my favorite day 1 play, right? You're probably going to trade off with something. If you play a 2/0/2, somebody's going to play a 1/1/1, and then they just both advance. But kind of a sneaky end of day, put this thing in there and kind of catch someone off guard. The out of faction shift is Axiom. Another one of those, toss it from your reserve to save 1 mana on something, in this case a permanent because it's Axiom. Still 2/2/3/0/3. I don't know. This is... Maybe Axiom doesn't have much that has this particular stat focus, right? Where it's low on mountain and high on the other 2, and maybe they're interested in it for that reason. I know they've got a bunch of stuff with that supply ability. But again, we're only going to know about half the card pool here. Never mind uniques, obviously. Alright, next up we have the Monolith Archivist. I believe... I want to say this is not actually in the deck, but it's coming from... It's in here right now because the out of faction is in the Izmir deck, which has been posted. But what the heck, it's in here now. We'll talk about it. It's not in this deck. It's pretty funny. You get a 3/3/3 for 2 right at common, which is overstated for sure. However, it says you don't get to advance. So you only get to play this guy to stop your opponent from advancing and buy some time, which means... There's probably going to be a more quote-unquote control-oriented, not that control's necessarily very applicable to this game, but a defensive, a slower, I guess would be the term, a slower version of an Ordis hero theme that is playing maybe multiple things with Defender and trying to buy time for some sort of late high mana payoff or something like that. We have no idea, but maybe there's something like that. So similarly, like we know Lyra has a 0 stat theme, and we don't know what exactly that looks like. So kind of cool to see this snuck in here. The rare upgrade says if you get a 2nd Bureaucrat out, you get to advance. So you have a chance of just getting a raw 2-cost 3/3/3 out of him. And then Izmir, the buy time guy in Izmir makes tons of sense. If you're familiar with Izmir, that's just what you would expect. but they probably don't get to have Defender within themselves, right? So getting to rare shift that in is probably pretty cool for them. All right, next up, back to stuff that is in the deck. Ordis Gatekeeper. 1/3/1 makes a token on the other side. So 3 cost 2 for 2. That's technically a little understated because you're getting 8 stat for 3, but you're getting the focus stat and you can make good use of that. That can be worth it. Granted, like, you're not focusing 4 on one side, you're getting 3 on the one side and 1/1/1 on the other. This is another one of those, kind of tuned around the possibility that you might be buffing all of your characters. And so it's losing a little bit of efficiency in exchange for, if you have your Charger Bastion, we'll see later, you get bonus value out of splitting the token off like that. The rare upgrade, very strangely, right, becomes a pseudo 3 cost 3/3/3, right, because you get 2 tokens now. So you're even, for a rare 3 cost, you're actually expressly understated. So this is something you would play only if you're very certain you're going to be boosting everything, which this starter deck probably is, for what it's worth. I don't think this rare is in the starter, but this is a very I am all in on making the tokens kind of character. And we'll see in the starter they get the faction shifted Ratatosker, which is sort of similarly shaped. The faction shift for this Gatekeeper goes into Muna. Pretty cool in this case. You get so target character in your other expedition gets 2 boosts. So you don't get to boost it itself. You don't just get to say, here's my 3 cost 3/5/3. Here's my, almost Daughter of Yggdrasil. But you do get quite a bit of value. And of course, your Muna, right? If you boost something that's anchored, that is incredibly fantastic. Really an interesting faction shift for Muna, I think. As with all these faction shifts, you have to look at their full card pool, but that's pretty good. I mean, we've seen some Muna decks be excited about the faction shifted physical training, and this is in that space for sure. Next, Ordis Spy. Here's the Sabotage card. I haven't checked if every single deck has a Sabotage card, but I think every single deck has a Sabotage card. Pretty normal Sabotage stuff. You pay an extra mana, you get a Sabotage out of it. Sabotage is good to have handy. Not necessarily good to have tons of it, but you like to have it around it. When it's good, it's really good. The rare upgrade gives you the classic +1/+1/+1 on 1 play. This, once again, though, is in the form of a token, which is something that we're sort of paying a penalty for on a lot of other cards, and we're just getting it at our normal rate here, which is pretty nice. Yeah, we're getting the 2 cost 3/3/3 that we expect from a rare 2 cost. But you get the token split off in case you're buffing everything, etc. The Bravos version is the same as the Ordis one, but funnily enough, they get the Ordis Recruit token. Right, there's no equivalent Bravos token, so this Spy is just going to come with the Soldier. They've sort of, I don't know, turned from the law or something like that. I wonder if there's going to be faction shift flavor text, because this would probably be a pretty funny story. Next, we have koba. If you have 3 or more other characters, we get 2 boosts. So this is one of the other ways you get paid off for all these, I make a token instead of having my own stats cards, is that you can make sure that koba is enabled. And if you enable koba, you're getting a 3 cost 4/4/4, which is quite fine. Ordis doesn't, in this deck, you don't have a lot of individually beefy characters, so koba's kind of your guy in that regard. The rare upgrade gives you the boost to 1/1/1 on both plays, which is certainly much better than Rate, and they get to do this because he has that 3 character requirement. If you play him without 3 other characters out, he's just bad. Sometimes a 3 cost 2/2 is, perfectly fine for the situation, right? Maybe you weren't going to do anything with that extra mana anyway, etc., but certainly under Rate. The Muna shift also wants you to have 3 or more other characters, in this case not because they're tokens, but because you anchored stuff. And he'll once again get 3 boosts. We saw Muna has a card like this. Shoot, I don't remember. Jingsu? I might not have his name quite correct, but it's very similar shape, but it specifically wants you to have plants. 2 plants. Koba says 3 of anything, and you're good to go. So depending on the shape of your Muna deck, but if you want that kind of effect, you might want Koba instead. Next, the Jeanne d'Arc. Very the old demo decks are old at this point, right? They are outdated, but Jean certainly was making a splash at road shows and the like. But here we have a 4-cost 2/2. When she leaves, you get 2 tokens, 1 in each expedition, which is kind of interesting. You're certainly putting yourself a little behind now. You might lose an advancement for this, right? Your opponent might get one up on you. But on the next day, you're going to have these 2 tokens plus Sigismar's token. Your Kobas are going to be alive immediately. Any sort of, full team buff you do, charge, bastion, etc., is going to be super nuts. And you're basically trying to use Jean to say, maybe I get 1-0'd or 2-1'd or something here, but I'm going to 2-0 you tomorrow. And try to flip advantage that way. The rare ups her cost and doubles your token, so it just makes really, really sure that you're going to, do quite a bit the next day with your charge or whatever you've got going on. Flip side, not only 5 is not only more than 4, 5 is, you're really sort of pushing, can you even avoid getting 2-0'd if you pay 5 cost for a 2/2 on this day? Maybe? Right? Probably not if you spend 5 out of, probably not if it's day 3, right? You spend 5 out of 5 mana on it. So she becomes much more of a late game closeout type of card, I think, just at that 1 increased mana cost, just because you're paying 3 in advance as your down payment, and it's possible that the 2 tokens in each ends up being overkill, right? But a very big impact, right? when you do it. The faction shift is into Axiom and has brass bugs again. So 5 costs 3/3, so you're only investing, so to say, 2 mana here. And then you're going to get 2 brass bugs for 2/2. Certainly, 2 mana for a single 4/4 worth of value, kind of a good investment. Pretty interesting one. Axiom's not going to have, presumably, I guess they have the brass bug hive, but they're not necessarily going to have a whole pile of cards that are buffing all of their brass bugs aside from that one we could probably expect. But pretty good rate nonetheless. Granted, still 5 cost and all that comes with that. And here we have Charge, the first Buff All My Guys card. 2/2, fleeting, buff all my guys. All of your characters get a boost for 2 mana. If you have 3 characters, this is sort of a little better than physical training, right? Sort of the base rate you boost a guy card, just because your boosters split up and you're not subject to removal so much in that way. But also it's fleeting, so you don't get to do it twice. Obviously, the big upside here, sometimes Ordis doesn't have 3 characters out, they have 7. and paying 2 mana for 7/7/7 is insane, fleeting or not. So this is a very, 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 very high upside, game-winning type of spell. The rare upgrade makes it lose fleeting, and now you can play it for 3 out of your reserve. So this is especially good if you've done some Jeanne d'Arc setup, and you're not having to spend too much of your mana just deploying more characters. You can play Charge twice in one day and really blow things up. Again, maybe that's overkill, and you just keep the second charge in your pocket. Rare shift in faction shift into Muna. Makes sense. Muna likes boosting their characters. Probably not going to have so many characters that Charge is an absolute blowout, but they might have a couple anchored guys. And then this becomes an interesting alternative, in a sense, to their version of a boost spell, which name is escaping me at the Nurture. Nurture is that one. The second spell in this deck is Sticky Note Seals. This is pretty straightforward. I think we've seen a lot of removal spells with this kind of pattern. So the seals will ship away something that costs 4 or more, has fleeting. The rare upgrade says it's not fleeting anymore. You can just play it out of your reserve for 4, so you get to possibly do this twice. And maybe just like freely mana zone every single one of these you see because you're only going to actually need 1 copy, presumably. The very funny rare shift trade with Axiom. So Axiom's removal in their starter deck only hits, I believe, 4 or less, and their faction shift is into Ordis because Sticky Note Seals only hits 4 or more. And we're returning the favor. Sticky Note Seals shifts into Axiom for the exact same reasons. Now this is a flashy one. This one is the rare 1x in the deck. Each deck has a single 1x in faction rare. So for Ordis, it is Open the Gates. The rare version of this lets you spend 5 to distribute For soldier tokens, any way you like. The common version of this lets you pay 5 to just get 2 on each side. So it's a very interesting rare upgrade where the rare is just getting you flexibility, right? It's not even getting you any raw power outside of 1 mana cost if you play it a second time or resupply it or something. So it's kind of a funny rare upgrade, one that we're not going to have to think about in this context because we're just imagining we bought 3 starters. But I wonder how many people are going to take this rare upgrade. It's certain. I think in most cases you'd rather have 3 on one side and 1 on the other if you've got some kind of mass boost going on to get like 6/6/6 and 2/2/2. For your 5 mana, that feels like that's what you're going to want. But so the rare upgrade feels interesting in that regard. Faction shift once again into Brass Bug land into Axiom. We can pay 4 to get a pair of Brass Bugs, which is on rate, gets to split the Brass Bugs across both sides, which most of the time you're going to want. Not too much to say about it, just kind of on rate Brass Bug generation if you have a really heavy Brass Bug theme, I guess. Now, the first of 2 permanents, very flashy one, the monolith, the Ordis Bastion. This costs 5, so if you put this down, you are probably getting 2-0'd. Maybe if you've got some Jean going on and your Sigismar token, you can manage to only get 1-0'd when you put this down, but you're probably getting 2-0'd. On the flip side, for the rest of the game, whenever you get any character, including a token, it gets a boost. And you're going to be very, very powerful for the rest of the game, so long as you can keep those tokens coming. Very interesting trade-off. Very, very much in... I could see this being part of the more defensive Ordis theme, where we're giving up that ground early. We're saying, you go ahead and 2-0 me. Every day after the 3rd, my deck's going to be nuts, right? And we're going to try to overpower you in some way. And then the rare shifts on these. So the Ordis one is interesting because it only affects non-token characters, and I don't know how many of those characters that's going to be. Certainly they have characters. A lot of them generate tokens, so you're giving up a lot of possible value if you don't get to buff your tokens anymore. But could there be an Ordis deck that you're building that just, if not doesn't use tokens at all, uses tokens in a light enough way that you're more interested in the rare version of this than the common? Because in the faction like Muna, which it's rare shifting into, paying 3 for this feels great. Especially, well, particularly because Muna is going to anchor things, but also you can put this down on day 1, right? I'm paying 3, and I'm going to try to play 1 or 2 characters a day for the rest of the game, and some of them are going to be anchored, and I'm going to very quickly get more than 3 mana worth of value out of these boost tokens. Is that enough of an edge to make up for probably getting 2-0'd on day 1? Maybe? Probably? I imagine a lot of Muna decks are going to try this at least. And they could also, if not on day 1, have something anchored going into a day, have that sort of advantage going in where now they can afford to spend the 3 putting down this Bastion. A very, very cool card for Muna for sure. And I believe, yes, we have one more permanent to talk about, the Ordis Carrier. This starts out at 3 costs. This is almost the opposite of the Bastion. At 3 costs, you get a token every day. This is in the opposite expedition as Sigismar's. So if you're Siggy and you put this down, you're going to start every day with a token on each side, which is doubly annoying, right? For your opponent. Now, they definitely have a little something to deal with in both expeditions. Just a good upfront start. Obviously helps fuel koba, helps with all of your Boost All My Guys cards. The rare upgrade turns that into 2 1/1s every day. I don't know if I'm paying 5. In both cases, it's going to take 3 days for this to make up its value, so to say, in terms of paying 1 for a 1/1 token. But it hits a little bit different when you're paying 5 up front. Once again, you're almost certainly getting 2-0'd. If you pay 5 on a permanent, barring anchor stuff that Ordis doesn't have. I mean, barring, I guess, Jean d'Arc stuff, maybe. But it's probably going to set you back quite a bit at a decent stage of the game. And then, 3 days to sort of make up for it, 4 days to feel particularly good about it. I could see it. I imagine most decks are just going to go ahead and take the common here. Izmir gets the faction shift. Again, more just like tiny bodies for Izmir to be peppering out to support their removal strategy. All you need is 1/1/1 if you're going to remove every guy that they put out on that side, right? So it's an interesting card for them for sure. I think they also got a faction shifted Brass Bug Hive for similar reasons. And now that, yes, that is it for the cards that are in this Ordis deck. We just have some tokens and then it moves on to Izmir. So, the second part of this exercise is, say we bought 3 Ordis starters just to start the game on like a super budget, but we want to have 3x of all the rares that come in the starters so we can make some deck building decisions, right? So what that amounts to is we're going to have to pick 5 of the 8 rares that we have to play. And if we pick more than one of the 1x's, we're going to have to start cutting some cards. And I will say I do not have huge confidence in this one, but I went ahead and took all 3 of the 1x rares. And so for faction shifts, it gets this foundry mechanic, which I've extolled a lot in the Axiom video. You know, similar to Ordis Trooper, where the rare is a 1 cost with more than 1/1/1 stat. In this case, it's 1/1/2 instead of 1/2/2. But you have the opportunity to ditch it from your supply to make a permanent cost 1 less. And, you know, that might be the difference between getting mega blown out when you play your Bastion and maybe actually only getting 1/0'd or something. So I think I like that a little bit more than the Trooper. I could be wrong. The Trooper's actually cut from this entirely. We'll get to that in a bit. We're also playing Ratatoskr because, you know, the 1/3 cost, it lets us play a 1-drop that isn't necessarily a 1-drop out of reserve, which can be good and bad. But it's a 3 cost, 3 tokens. We saw a different rare upgrade that was just doing this, and the rare upgrade was that you got to do this. We're just taking it on a 1-drop here and being pretty happy with it. Other than that, so I wound up, I'm talking like down at the bottom here. Is the cursor doesn't show up. So I cut Ordis Carrier. And that is a little crazy. But my thinking is that if I play the Carrier and the Bastion both in one game, I don't know if I can overcome that much mana poured into permanents. So I kind of don't want to have them both. Although I think, you know, the sort of expectation is you're going to play one and mana zone the other, unless you're really sure you can afford it. But because we're playing all 3 of the 1x's, I felt, you know, I have to cut 2 cards. I'm going to cut one of the 2 permanents here. And really just lean into that. We have Bastion, we have Charge, and we have Rare koba to pay us off for having all these guys. And we're going to find some combination of this to make, you know, this rare Ratatoskr and the other things we're doing worth it. So along those lines, we are playing the rare Open the Gates and the rare Ordis Spy. This rare Ordis Spy is basically being chosen over rare Jeanne d'Arc, I would say, as sort of extra token generation for your rare upgrades. I think this is basically, I'm thinking this is because 5 cost Jeanne and 5 costs Open the Gates are, you know, they're both 5 costs. Our monolith is 5 costs. I think that's probably too much 5 cost stuff to be doing with a straight face. I think you're probably running either the rare Jeanne or the Open the Gates, and I wanted to pick Open the Gates here. And then once we have Open the Gates and koba and the 2 1-drops, it's sort of, do we want to play our common Ordis Trooper? And then if we do, what else did we cut out of here? We should have cut 2 cards entirely. I may have miscounted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Oh no, we cut the Trooper. Yeah. If we bring in the common Trooper, we have to cut something else. It ends up being probably Frogprins, maybe Jeanne, maybe the Gatekeeper. I kind of wanted to keep this Frogprins Gatekeeper thing where they're kind of making up for each other's weak biomes. I didn't really want to cut just one of those, so I wound up going minus the Trooper. It's possible that 9 1-drops is just way too many. I would certainly want to try it at some point, but I think if you're going to play that many 1-drops, you're really looking to kind of start skipping your mana drops really early and just not run anything that costs more than maybe 3 or like 1/4. And this deck certainly isn't going to do that, and it certainly doesn't have the card draw or anything like that to be playing, you know, 3 characters a turn for very long if it's not skipping the mana drops. So just going down to the 6 1-drops here, both of the rares. Well, I guess there's 3 rare 1-drops in this deck, but the 2 out-of-faction ones we're taking, and we're ditching the Trooper to make up for that. So, like I said, I'm not going to say with any confidence this is the best way to do it. I'm no expert. Nobody really is at this point. But I think this is what my first crack would be if I was going to pick 5 of these 8 rares for this deck. So, that'll be a wrap for this one. One more left is going to be Izmir. That'll be, probably coming up in the way these are going, probably about 2 days. Probably expect that on Monday. And looking forward to that because that's a bit of that faction sort of works differently from the others, a little bit more differently than some of the other faction distances that we see. So that'll be a cool one to do. Let me know what you think. Let me know what 5 rares you would pick out of this pile. I think this is a very tough decision outside of, me leaving the Monolith Runescribe sitting on the floor because I just don't like resupply enough to be doing that. But picking 5 of the other 7 and then figuring what your cut if you're playing all the faction ships or 2 of the faction ships or whatever is a pretty interesting call to be making. So yeah, let me know what you think, and have a nice weekend. Look forward to the next one, and look forward to that Kickstarter on Tuesday. All right, have a good day.